want to do today is actually start with a little bit about this morning. And actually, I think many of yours drive into this very facility, including mine. You know, when I think about our city, there's a stark contrast that I see almost everywhere in Albuquerque. And I saw that this morning. I see it pretty much every morning, but especially this morning as I'm driving here to Hotel Albuquerque. And of course, look, what's one thing you might have noticed? Maybe some homeless, right? Maybe a tent, an encampment. Maybe you saw a few broken windows. This is in many ways where we're at. If you drive around Old Town, and I know this is true all over the city, this is just an example. This is the first impression that you see now, right? We have a massive homelessness problem. We also have a fentanyl problem, and we have a related crime problem on top of all of that. And when I think about Old Town, I was actually early this morning, which almost never happens. So I did a loop around the plaza at Old Town, and I was thinking about the work we've been trying to do there. You know, we've got police security cameras that are popped up there. We have businesses with broken windows. And you see at first, right, you see something that none of us want to see, and you feel something that none of us want to see, which is a city facing deep challenges. That is absolutely true outside, whether it's our car window or our home window or our business window, every day in Albuquerque and right here in Old Town. But as I kind of turned around the plaza and I drove back over to Hotel Albuquerque, you know, something else also breaks through right away. There's construction. There are things here that were not here 10 years ago. And as I turned around the corner, I realized and remembered that Sawmill didn't even exist 6 years ago. This whole concept that has transformed this area wasn't even there 6 years ago. Hotel Chaco, roughly 9 years ago. In fact, actually, Old Town is one of the most vibrant and growing and prosperous areas of our city, despite what I saw this morning and what you see this morning, right when you got off the freeway. That is the story of Albuquerque right now. It's a story, bizarrely, of two truths. It's a truth of deep challenge, of challenges that we see literally at our doorstep or next to our car almost every day. But it's also a story of massive generational change that is happening right now. The construction that you see is literally redesigning this entire area to be an expanded town center. The construction that you see is also the beginning, the first step of a 30-year idea for the rail trail. These are generational projects that are literally transforming our city for our kids. Our kids now, mine are in middle school, they think the Sawmill has been there forever. And they think that, these things happen just magically. They don't. When you see the Sawmill, when you see the rail trail, when you see a lot of the things that we're talking about, these are directed, sometimes decades-old ideas that we are actually finally getting done in the city of Albuquerque. So that's the moment we're in. It's a pivotal year. It's a transitional year. But it's a year where we see breaking through major ideas that I've talked about, and everyone has talked about many of these ideas, even at the Economic Forum for almost a decade. The difference is they're finally getting done. And so let's talk about some of these aspects and unpack a little bit what's behind both the challenges and the things that are breaking through. Now, before I go into homelessness in detail, I want to emphasize a little bit about how difficult these challenges are. And I think we all know this sort of, off the top of our head. Obviously, if problems were easy, they would be easier to solve and we wouldn't have them. And that's why there's a temptation to just say, well, why can't we do blank? Why can't we just not have people on our streets? Why can't we just arrest people who are doing crime, right? These problems are actually very difficult. And I know you all know that. But I want to emphasize in America, right, we've seen an 18% increase in homelessness. And in Albuquerque, we have faced this challenge actually long before a lot of the rest of America had this challenge. And it's because we've had massive structural problems in the way we deliver services. And so what we've tried to do at the city is we've said, look, we are going to address these problems with the respect and with the problem-solving rigor to actually fix the problem, to not do a pilot project, to not just have a press conference and give lip service to a one-off idea. We're actually trying to transform these challenging areas in our city. So here's how this is playing out with homelessness. I think back 10 years ago, and I remember, let's focus on, I'm gonna pick on the tent that I saw right out on the freeway, on the highway, that I think all of you saw. Where can that person go at 6 a.m. this morning? The answer 10 years ago was nowhere. There was literally nowhere open for them to sleep in a warm place at night. That was true 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the city took care of about 200 people just at night and just during the winter. And that was the only way there was transportation, and this was the old jail out on the west side. That was literally the only thing the city did for our unhoused community 10 years ago. Today, last night, we had over 1,000 people that we were sheltering out of the cold. And we were also transporting about the same amount. Now, we know the problem is still there. It was still there this morning, and the challenges in that individual's life, those problems are still there. The difference is the city is drastically scaling up to meet some of these challenges in a very real way. So number one, there was nowhere that was open. That's changed. Last night, there were 3 different locations that were open for everyone in our city who needed a warm place and food and safety at night. That didn't exist 10 years ago. Second thing was transportation. 10 years ago, we had a bus that took you from Coronado Park. We all remember what that used to look like. And that bus took you, there were a couple of runs at night to the shelter and then bust you back in the morning, just during the months of December and January. Now we do that every single day. And we have the shelter open every day. And not only that, we actually bussed several dozen of people last night on a one-off basis. Because now we have an entirely new department, the Community Safety Department, that literally will go to somebody who is in need of shelter and personally take them to where they can get help. This department has taken 80,000 calls in the last 2 years. That didn't even exist 10 years ago. And by the way, that is 80,000 calls that APD or AFR did not have to take. That's the power of the structural change that we're doing. Now, the other thing is, of course, where can people go? Well, the difference now is, we've all heard, hopefully by now, about the Gateway, right? This is the old Loveless Hospital. But the Gateway, I want to remind everyone, was a very old idea. When I first came in, I flew with some of you to San Antonio to understand what they were doing for their unhoused community. And the answer was really simple. You have to have one place that is a gateway to services that is open 24/7 and that has no barrier. Albuquerque has never had this until last year when we finally opened most of those services. So now at the Gateway Center in Loveless, last night, we have a 24/7 first responder drop-off that had 24 people in it. We have 50 beds for medical sobering that we just opened yesterday, thanks to UNMH, by the way, who helps operate both of those. We also have medical respite. We also have almost 100 beds for women, and we have 300 other people getting treatment for opioid and addiction. None of that existed 10 years ago. Now, this has become an entire system. We have a hotel on Gibson last night that 100 families actually spend the night at almost every day until we get them into permanent housing. This is our family gateway. We're building at the old location where you got your driver's license at the DMV. That's going to be our recovery gateway. This is going to be a pallet home setup where people can actually get treatment and recover from addiction. We're going to have about 100 spaces in that part of the gateway network. And then we're even having a youth gateway. We bought the old San Mateo Inn. We're converting hotels into transitional housing for people who need it. So the gateway system now has 5 different pieces, and it's about 3/5 of the way open. So this is what has changed from 10 years ago. We have a fighting chance to actually do something for that person. And also, we make sure that we do things like enforce our laws. We clean 200 camps a week. Now, I know you might say, well, look at all the camps. Imagine if we didn't clean 200 camps a week. You know what we didn't do at all 10 years ago? None of that. We didn't do any on-street outreach as a city. 0. This is what we are building up, and these are lasting structural changes that are transforming how we respond to these challenges. Now, the challenge, of course, is we've got to scale. We actually know what to do for the first time in a decade. And we actually are beginning to do it. We just have to do it to a tune of 5,000 people every day, because that is how many people are unhoused in our city. Now, to do that, we need help. There's no way Albuquerque city government can do this alone. And we have partners who also understand this now. The county, even the state, you see the legislation that is now being filed, you see what people are talking about. For the first time in a decade, the priorities for the Roundhouse are homelessness and crime. How refreshing is that, right? And we don't have to get into why it wasn't always that way every year before. The point is this year, right, we're breaking through. We are finally addressing these problems head on. And it's also because we know what to do. We just have to scale it. We've got to invest in it at the same scale that the problem actually presents itself. And so that's why we absolutely need help from everyone who's involved in our community, especially folks who control the purse strings up in Santa Fe. So for us, if we think about that homeless problem, I actually have hope that we can do this. We've got $20 million in opioid money that hopefully City Council is actually going to invest into our community. We have massive surpluses at the state level once again, which is wonderful because we desperately need it. And now we actually know what to do with those funds and how to spend it. Because the number one challenge facing, in general, our community, and I think every community in America, is actually fentanyl and addiction. And that is a challenge that we have to face together. But the difference is in New Mexico this year, we actually have the resources to make a difference on that issue. That's what also gives me hope in 2025. Now, when we think about the individual who is camping on our streets, I mentioned fentanyl, I've mentioned addiction, but I also want us to touch on the fact that fundamentally we also have a housing shortage. You can't deal with some of these issues when you're short 20,000 housing units. And that's what the studies have shown. Many of you are very aware of the work we've been doing to try and work on this issue. But I will let you know that this also is something where we see a stark contrast. Yes, we have a 20,000 unit housing shortage, but also the city itself has actually produced 4,000 new housing units in the last 10 years. That is actually 10 times more than we did the 10 years before that. We are drastically scaling up all of a sudden in terms of the housing units that we have. And the private sector is playing a huge role in this. Almost every housing project that we touch is majority funded by the private sector. But the city plays a critical role, along with the state and the county, in all sorts of housing projects up and down Central. We were trying to count this up, and it turns out we've actually done 24 housing projects. I'm not going to list them all, but if you drive down Central, they are unavoidable now. You see senior living, you see even housing projects that are not their market rate. And you see this even across from Presbyterian Hospital. All of these ideas are also not new. That Highlands project across from Presbyterian, that project was at least 20 years old, till we came in and said we're actually going to do it. So here again, we see the same thing. Yeah, we see a city with housing challenges all over, but we also see new units being built. But if you're short 20,000, we need way more, which is why housing is also a priority at the legislature and for our governor. And so we believe we finally have the fuel, the investment fuel, and the mechanisms with respect to what to do to actually meet this crisis also head on. Now, when I came into office, a lot of folks told me, our zoning code is archaic, everyone hates the planning department, and all of these things about how difficult it is to do business in Albuquerque. And I agree with you. And everyone would tell me, well, look at Phoenix or look at Rio Rancho and these kinds of things. And I will tell you now, especially Monday night at City Council, our Housing Forward program has now transformed all of the rules and regulations for housing development in a larger degree than our city has seen in 40 years since we actually started doing zoning in the first place. So all of a sudden, these long-standing barriers about can you build a casita? Can you convert a hotel to an apartment building? Can you convert an office building to a hotel? Or can you not have endless appeals for 3 years on every single project? All of that changed first 2 years ago, and then we finished the job last night on Monday night. So for us, we do have, for the first time, right, a transformed environment for building housing in our city. That, again, 10 years ago did not exist. So now we got to use these tools. This is what it's about. And so I will say we need all sorts of folks to take advantage of all of these new rules and regulations, and even simple things like the fact that our planning department has a great director and is finally implementing a host of things to make it easier for you to do business with respect to filing all those permits and things like that. So, by the way, that's about the POSSE system, which is coming online hopefully in the next few months. I know we're a few months late on that as well. But the environment is drastically different. And so this is part of in general, our Metro Housing Initiative. And it's part of the fact that we're saying, look, we are doing the real things to make a difference in the long term. We're not just saying for one specific project, you get special treatment. That has also been a challenge that we've had for decades. We get it right for one project and we make it difficult for everyone else. Now we're trying to make it the same for everyone. So when we think about the challenges that we see, of course underneath this is also crime. And we know that crime is a huge problem. I know that we're coming off all-time highs. This is also what changed last year in 2024. So basically for the last 10 years, every crime category has been going up. No one should be surprised by that. That is a terrible thing. I don't like saying that. No one wants to live in a city where crime's been going up for the last 10 years. The difference, and COVID was an exception, so I'm just, those of you who are like following the numbers, obviously COVID was different for crime. The difference is, last year we saw for the first time a full year's worth of drop in half our crime statistics. That's the difference. Now, they're coming down from an all-time high. I understand that. But I also understand that we have turned the corner. When you see homicides down for 2 years in a row, when you see assaults down for 2 years in a row, when you see auto theft down for 2 years in a row, these are good things. We are going the right direction, and there are reasons for this. And I'm going to share some of this, and we also have much, much further to go. And I do want to actually plug one of the things that I'm very encouraged about is the juvenile crime package, actually, that our DA is working on. This is, again, something we should have done 20 years ago. But thank goodness this session we're actually going to get it done. So here's what's happening with crime. 10 years ago, we had a department on the cusp of literal failure. We were almost taken over by the feds in receivership. That was actually only 4 years ago. We have the consent decree, which you know about. The department had been decimated with only around, I think it was 777 officers or something like that when I came in. Basically half staffing. Morale was low. We had police cars with no radar in them. That's why no one ever got traffic tickets, because they didn't have it in the car. We had a helicopter that could not fly in the summer. This department was falling apart 10 years ago. Now, it's taken us some time. This department is now in a drastically different place. And we used to essentially hope and pray that we could get more officers. And I actually still do that, because that is the most important thing we can do. And that's why our staffing levels show us at the end of this coming year, finally at 1,000 officers, which is a credit to a whole host of efforts. But we decided a couple of years ago not to wait. We're not going to wait for this magical 1,200 officers. Instead, we're going to fight crime a different way. We're actually going to innovate. We're going to transform our department, and we're going to do two things. We're going to use technology, and we're going to use civilians. Now, technology, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know at least some of you have gotten speeding tickets from our automated speed cameras. And we're doubling them, just so you know. So there's about 20 of those all over the city. There's going to be 40. But look, all of a sudden, the speeding issues and the incidents that are speeding related are down in Albuquerque. Because I think it's pretty obvious, people are starting to slow down because they're getting tickets. In fact, we're almost about, I think, at the 100,000 number in terms of people who've gotten tickets from these automated speed cameras. But that's a small example. Let's talk about auto theft. Look, we were worst in the entire country in auto theft 10 years ago. Now, we're fifth worst, right? This is the story. So, we're going the right direction. And actually, I'm optimistic this year, the stats aren't out yet, but maybe we're going to be out of the top 10 in a bad way, right? So the trends are finally going in the right direction. But even auto theft, we put license plate readers all over the city too. So we're reading your license plate to find out if you're driving a stolen car. We also put 10,000 video cameras up all over the city. And we added gunshot detection. And so when you put this together with a crime-fighting real-time technology program out at our real-time crime center, what happens is when you do something really bad in this city, we will actually catch you. So our clearance rate for more or less 10 years, that is more or less the number with which if you shoot someone in Albuquerque, what are the chances of us catching you in 1 year? You know what it was for about 10 years? 50%. We wouldn't even catch you. Now it's been above 90% for the last year and a half. If you shoot someone in Albuquerque, we will catch you and put you in jail. Now what happens to you after that is a larger criminal justice question. But the point is, APD is all of a sudden effective again. And by the way, this is across the board. They do cite things like people on medians. Now, I know it's only 30 a month, and we still have the challenge. They do cite for loitering. We gave a dozen littering tickets last month. Our department is enforcing our laws, but the same problem applies. We have to scale, right? We have to do this more. I think our entire city should be covered by the cameras, the license plate readers, and the gunshot detection that I just mentioned. Right now, it's not. It's only 20% of the city. That's why my ask at the state legislature is, can you please give us all the same technological safety and crime fighting ability, no matter where we live? You know, that only costs $8 million. That's what I hope our New Year's present is coming out of the legislative session, among a whole host of other things. So you put this technology together, and then we add in civilians. So what do you do if you're half-staffed for officers? We use technology instead of officers. So remember, those cameras giving you speeding tickets are so that officers can take violent 911 calls or investigate violent 911 calls and issues, so we're not taking their time to stand on the corner. Now, they still do some of that. But that's how technology is actually a force multiplier. So that in equivalence, it's the same thing as adding more officers. The other thing is civilians. I mentioned our community safety department. You know, our officers will all tell you one of the things they are most grateful for is that someone else took those 80,000 calls, right? So that they could take high priority, violent 911 calls. 80,000 calls out of their queue and into the ACS queue. That is also a force multiplier. That is the same thing mathematically as adding more officers. So now we actually do have 1,200, which is our sort of magic number, of people dealing with crime or related issues in our city. The difference is half of them are civilians, right? That community safety department is civilians. We now have a layered approach of security where we use our, we call it our public works security. We also have PSAs. We have quadrupled the number of PSAs, public service aides. We have transit officers. We have open space officers. All of these are different layers, but less certified and less trained, true, than officers. They're essentially versions of civilians. So we're using civilians to make sure that our officers are focused on where we need them most. That is why we see these categories starting to go in the right direction. So we know what to do. We just have to keep going forward, and we have to continue to scale this method up. And you see this even on our bus system. You know, our bus system a year ago, 2 years ago, was just out of control. And we all know, like, the art project, and we've all talked about that. But the point is, right, our buses were being used for all sorts of things other than public transit for everyone, and it just wasn't safe. That also has come around. Our bus-related calls for service have been cut in half. But you know why? We have transit officers, and we have people actually cleaning all the bus stops on Central every single day. And so these are the kinds of things that are finally showing an impact. This is about us finding ways to break through these tough issues that we can also sustain. They're things we're going to keep doing, and we're going to keep doing more of them. Now, I want to touch a little bit just on the economy. Because there's obviously a whole host of things we can talk about. I want to save some time for questions. But I do want to let folks know that I think in the economy we see a very similar story. For decades, our goal was to go after the big fish. We were going to land Green 2V or Orion. I mean, I've lost track of like all the different companies that were going to move here. And they didn't. Now, we still go after them. So I want to be clear. I actually spent Sunday with our good friends, Maxion, and they actually have finished their agreement, and they're moving into the Honeywell building at the airport, and they're still working on their Maysville facility. I'm not here to talk about that, but that's good news. But the point is, what we also decided to do several years ago is make sure that we're not just waiting for the big fish. We're actually going to make sure that we are making strategic investments lifting up our economy, both physically in neighborhoods and in communities, and also in businesses. So now we've done 24 LIDA deals. Most of you know what LIDA deals are, but they're all very strategic. They're homegrown New Mexico companies that are scaling, or they're very targeted tech, directed energy companies or aerospace companies that we want to either keep here or bring here. So instead of doing one giant deal, we've done 22 medium-sized deals. And we think that is diversifying our risk, right? Is making us much less dependent on a hope and a prayer for a giant company to move here. Now, we'll still take the giant company moving here. But that's a very different strategy, and we've paired that with our own JTIP program. So we've now created 5,000 new jobs for about 500 different companies. It's like that notion of an increment of one. If I can help you hire 1, 2, 3, 5 more people, that is actually just as valuable. And it's actually much more stable than having it all come in the form of like a call center. So that's the kind of stability we're trying to bring to our economy through our economic development efforts. But you also see this in big picture ways with respect to essentially larger real estate development. You know, we know last year, wonderfully, we approved the UNM tax increment district. UNM has $400 million of incoming infrastructure investment. That is the city's way and the county and the state's way of supporting our flagship university. And we're very excited to see what they do with that and what happens over time. But I mention this because this is the same thing. I know 10 years from now, UNM is going to be a drastically transformed and improved place because of $400 million, right? It's just happening very slow, but it is going to happen. That is done. Most people don't even know that that already passed the legislature and everything in between. And we see this in small ways. We've got CVS's and Walgreens closing, but we also have 2 new Targets coming. We see this in Nob Hill. We have 3 restaurants that close, but we have 5 that are open. It's the same story. 2 of these things are happening at the same time. Breakthrough initiatives that are helping communities, but also challenges facing us each and every day. Now, I want to bring us, I think, to downtown, because I think there is no better symbol of where we're at as a city than downtown. And it's the same story. I'm sure everyone here thinks downtown is in real trouble and has lots of challenges. You know what? That's true. I also know downtown is in a better place than it's been in 10 years. So here's how this plays out. Downtown, of course, after COVID, there's no one in office buildings. We have empty office buildings. We have people breaking the windows in those office buildings. But here's what's different. Just a couple of weeks ago, hard to remember, we passed for the first time in our city's history, we gave downtown control of its own money. We got the politicians and the government out of the way when it comes to funding downtown. This is the tax increment financing district, worth $200 million over the next 20 years that is just for downtown. Council passed that 3 weeks ago. These are the kinds of things that are transformative. It's the same thing, like I said, with UNM. Downtown will be totally different and better because of this. It's just a question of how fast we can do it and what we do with that funding. And you already see this. If you actually look at downtown, we have a new hotel in downtown for the first time in 20 years. The Arrive Hotel is opening in February, and it is awesome. And it, by the way, has a great pool and a great bar, and you're all going to love it. No one would have believed that in this environment, with all of these challenges, that someone would actually build a new hotel right at 8th and Central. Yet that is exactly what is opening in 2 months. And you see follow-ons to that, whether it's the great restaurant Ex Novo, which if you haven't been is incredible. You see actually that corner of downtown already transforming. And I know what's coming next. Another old idea we are finally breaking through on. The rail yards. We've been talking about doing something at the rail yards for 30 years too. Well, you know what? The C&M Film Academy is actually going to happen. In fact, it's about 2/3 of the way done, and there are going to be hundreds of students in the rail yards for the first time in decades. They're saying now around 2026, so a little more than a year away. So here again, we see we've just got to follow through on that project, right? And if you have the rail yards with C&M, you have a new hotel, and we've got plans for the Wells Fargo building and things like this, downtown is going to change. It's happening right there. You just have to see through some of the challenges like the broken windows that you have to look through to understand that. So this is, I believe, where we're at in so many ways as a city. And I'll wrap up my remarks by saying that we're also never going to forget quality of life all around the city. And what we've seen is, over the last decade, we have put a massive premium on third spaces. This is this idea that you have work and you have home, but you got to go somewhere with your family. The Sawmill is a great example of that. Again, a public-private partnership. We have, though, 3 new multi-gen or community centers. Those of you who have kids are well aware of the important role these play, or if you have parents who are seniors, because we actually take care of almost 10,000 seniors at these centers every day. We've built 3 new ones. That's more than we've built in the last 20 years. We also are building new libraries. We hadn't built libraries in 20 years either. And so we now have the huge new library in the International District. And so we're investing in these third spaces. We're even building a giant Olympic swimming pool, if you didn't know that. That is out at Domingo Baca, and that's under construction right now. So we're going to continue to transition our city. And we're going to transition it into a place where it may have taken us a winding road to get there. It may have taken us a little bit too long. But we are making generational changes all around us, even in things like the Balloon Fiesta. You know, we're 1 court hearing away from another 30-year idea to have a professional sports stadium. 1 court hearing away, and that thing is done. So knock on wood on that. And perhaps more exciting to some of you, this year, finally, at the Balloon Fiesta, we're going to have toilets that flush. So the Balloon Fiesta, it's the same symbol. Think of this. It's a dirt lot. We finally put grass there. We put up little flags temporarily. The vision for the Balloon Fiesta is a permanent facility that we use for all sorts of things year-round, right? That's, again, a generational change. So this is why I believe we've just got to keep focused and keep investing in what we're doing in Albuquerque. I know that when I was a kid, I was in high school. Anyone remember the Big Eye project when that was being done? I'm dating myself here. So that thing almost destroyed this city. And I was commuting from the Heights to Pius when I was in high school, of course, like driving way too fast and having a good time on the highway. But I even remember driving, it took me like an hour to get to school, and it used to only take me back then 15 minutes. And the whole town, talk radio, complaining about everything in the city. Not just that, but it was just like, Albuquerque's a giant train wreck. I mean, this was the attitude back then. And you know what? We were in the middle of a whole lot during that. It wasn't just about that project, right? This is the era where we first renovated things like the Alvarado train station, where we actually bought the Balloon Fiesta Park. The city was in flux, right? This is also when we were fighting about the Montano Bridge project, right? The city was in flux, and it felt, I think, like it feels today. In some ways, it feels a little bit scary sometimes. But if you look past the construction and you look at what we're actually building towards, it is generational change. That's what we've invested in. We have faced these problems in a real way. We face them in a long-term generational way that is going to last. And I know as soon as that Big Eye project was done, everyone was like, this is the most incredible project, and it's beautiful, and I love it. Now there's no more traffic. Now, I am saying this because now we're redoing it now too, right? So yes, once again, I feel like we're in this situation. But the concept is the same. And it's the same, actually, to conclude with what I saw this morning. You know, it was freezing last night. And by the way, you know, we do cancel all our encampment cleanup and everything like that whenever it's below freezing. I mean, you have to. You've just got to make sure people are okay. But what I also saw, you know, clouds, wind, everything, and then I saw that beautiful New Mexico sunrise. Those powerful rays of light bursting through those clouds. That's what these ideas are. These are ideas that you are going to tell your grandkids. You remember when we built the rail trail, something that is going to connect this literal community in Old Town all the way to downtown and is going to tell the story of our own history in a wonderful Antoine Piedock designed vision. You're going to tell the story of what it was like when we actually got a professional soccer stadium that we used for all sorts of things. You're going to tell the story of when our city had, for the first time in a long time, a nationally recognized homelessness program that actually helped people get out of addiction. These are the things we've been investing in, and these are the things we've got to keep investing in. And so I hope this morning you've seen a glimpse of those rays of light breaking through these tough times, and that you believe that if we continue to do what we're doing, and we continue to honor the hard work that we've done, and we invest in what's working, we are going to have an incredible future and realize the promise of the city of Albuquerque. Thank you so much.
Hi, Mayor. Art Gardner.
Yes.
How are you today? Tell us about the convention center, what your plans are there, and how do you think that fits in with the overall situation downtown?
Oh, great question. And no one's asked me this in a long time. So here's the amazing thing, and I know folks who visit Albuquerque are here. They did a great study. I think they presented this. And the amazing thing is, we've seen, and I'm going to use the same framework because it's true. 10 years ago, there was nowhere to have a softball tournament in Albuquerque. It was like regionally competitive. There was nowhere to have a baseball tournament, and there was nowhere to have a track tournament. And we're working on what we can do about a basketball tournament. But the point is, we fixed up Los Altos. Now it hosted more tournaments than the city has ever seen in the history of the city. We of course have the complex out on the west side for baseball, and we have the indoor track that we use for track and field at the convention center. So the idea with the convention center is we need to utilize it more because of all sorts of broader issues around actually getting conventions. And so we're looking at all sorts of multifaceted ways to use it, including for things like concerts again. I don't know if you noticed how concerts are coming back and how we can use it because these tournaments bring families, right? So the college or the high school kid or even the middle school kid comes, but they're bringing parents and they stay in our hotels and they eat in our restaurants. So this has a high return on investment. But there's something bigger with the convention center that I want to do, which is yet another 40-year idea. But we're going to try it again. There's still that empty parking lot right across from the convention center. And I know I was actually at the, I think it was NAIOP, but I was running for mayor, and I remember my predecessor was like, we're going to build the tallest building in the state on that piece of land. And actually, it was kind of a good idea. The problem is, no one had the financing, all the proposals were short, $50 million. So we've got to figure out what to do with that piece of property. So I'm going to share with you my vision, but I will tell you this needs more work. This is going to take many more years, but I'm committed to it. And I think it should be the home for UNM facilities. It's time, like in Arizona. Arizona State helped resuscitate and rebuild Phoenix. And they did it by bringing professional programs downtown. And that's why that building, I've told UNM, it's that piece of land, it's yours. But it has to work with the convention center. Because you can see how the conferences for UNM then are part of the convention center apparatus. Now that goes for CNM too, or any other university that wants to do it. But that is something that, again, almost every city in America has figured this out. Albuquerque has a gaping hole. I'm offering it for free to university to move downtown.